Muammar Gaddafi came to power in 1969 through a bloodless military coup, overthrowing the existing monarchy in Libya. He established a socialist government and implemented policies that redistributed wealth and nationalized industry. Gaddafi was a revolutionary hero who fought against the political interference of the West in his time. Despite his efforts to modernize and industrialize the country, many Libyans came to view Gaddafi as a despot who suppressed dissent and stifled political opposition. Although Gaddafi had the goal of uniting Africa as one, he failed to satisfy his people as reports of human rights abuse and repression poisoned the hearts of his people to revolt against him. Despite his efforts to present himself as a leader of the Arab and African world, his rule was ultimately characterized by repression and violence, leading to his downfall and death in 2011. In this session, we will delve into how Gaddafi rose to power while detailing the good, evil, ugly and all the less known facts about him. Please subscribe to my channel before we get started. On June 7, 1942, Muammar Gaddafi was born into a Bedouin family in the desert region of Sirte in Libya. At the age of 9, Gaddafi was put in the care of his uncle because his family were unable to afford his education. Gaddafi lived in a cave with his uncle, where he was brought up and had access to better education. He was not considered to be an exceptional student, and it is said that he was more interested in politics and sports than his studies. Muammar Gaddafi reportedly developed a political interest at a young age and was greatly influenced by the writings of Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, who promoted pan-Arab nationalist aspirations. He was also greatly impacted by the marginalization and poverty that many of his fellow Libyans experienced, especially those from the Bedouin areas. He thought that the monarchy-run political system that was in place at the time wasn't doing enough to take care of the needs of the nation's poorest and most marginalized residents. He was adamant about bringing change and giving individuals who had been disregarded by the government a voice. He fought for a political system and a more just distribution of resources and wealth. His desire for social justice and political change is what drove him to pursue a career in politics. He later joined the Libyan military and attended military academy, where he received training as a military officer. During his military training, Muammar Gaddafi was known for his ambition, intelligence and leadership skills. By the early 1960s, he was a young officer with the rank of captain. During this time, he started to form a group called the Free Officers Movement. This group and Gaddafi had planned a coup for a while, and the opportunity presented itself when the Libyan leader, King Idris, went out of the country for a medical checkup. Gaddafi and the group immediately seized the chance and executed the military coup on September 1, 1969. The group overtook key government buildings such as taking over radio and television stations, the telephone exchange and the military bases in Tripoli and other major cities. And they also took control of the royal palace. The palace was also where the government's main military command was located, so it was considered a key target during the coup. They quickly took control of the country by seizing these important government buildings. The people of Libya were in full support of the coup because the country was hit with economic and social problems, and it was also supported by political groups like socialists, nationalists and Arab nationalists, which made the coup swift and easy. One of the key demands of the coup leaders was for the return of the British and American military bases in Libya, which had been established during World War II and was still in operation at the time of the coup. The coup was also notable for its lack of foreign involvement. Unlike many other coups and revolutions in Africa, the 1969 coup in Libya was a purely domestic affair, with no outside powers providing support or backing to the coup leaders. Gaddafi's revolutionary government also launched a number of ambitious economic and social programs aimed at improving the lives of the Libyan people, including land reform, education and healthcare initiatives, and public work projects. Under the regime of de facto leader, Muammar Gaddafi launched numerous economic and social programs, thereby increasing the standard of living of the people. Muammar Gaddafi's government implemented a number of social programs and policies aimed at reducing poverty in Libya. These included the land reform system, where the government expropriated large land holdings and distributed them to small farmers and landless peasants, with the goal of increasing agricultural productivity and reducing poverty in rural areas. The government launched a number of large-scale public works projects, including the construction of dams, irrigation systems, and roads, which aimed to improve infrastructure and create jobs. The government built thousands of low-cost housing units and provided subsidies to help low-income families purchase their own homes. Moreover, Gaddafi invested heavily in education and healthcare, building schools, universities, and hospitals throughout the country. It also provided free education and healthcare to all citizens, which helped to improve living standards and reduce poverty. The government also implemented policies to redistribute wealth, such as progressive taxation, price controls on basic goods, and subsidies for certain products, like food and fuel. Libya's GDP per capita grew significantly during Gaddafi's rule, and by the late 1970s, it was among the highest in Africa. In 1977, Libya's de facto leader, Muammar Gaddafi, and the revolutionary group sought to improve the country's social, political and economical system. Gaddafi changed the name of the country to the Socialist People's Libyan Arab Jamahiriya, which means giving power to the masses. However, there were some reforms he made in the political system of Libya which received backlashes and made him unpopular among his people. The de facto leader adopted a one-party state known as Jamahiriya. Muammar Gaddafi's Jamahiriya was intended to eliminate the need for political parties and the competition they create. He believed that traditional political parties were corrupt and divisive, and hindered the ability of the government to govern effectively. By eliminating political parties, he hoped to create a more unified and cohesive society. This led to the suppression of political opposition and human rights abuses, as well as to a lack of political pluralism and democracy, which led to widespread criticism from the international community. Gaddafi government was criticized for human rights abuses, including the use of torture and extrajudicial killings against political opponents and perceived enemies of the state. Detaining Libyan people who opposed him. His government was also criticized for discrimination against ethnic and religious minorities, particularly against the Berber minority and the country's small Jewish community. Gaddafi's government was based on an Arab nationalist ideology, which emphasized the unity of the Arab people and the rejection of ethnic and cultural diversity. The Berbers were seen as a challenge to this ideology, and the government sought to suppress their culture and identity while persecuting them. In the year 1986, Gaddafi was accused by the United States for the bombing of a nightclub in West Berlin which claimed the lives of 2 U.S. servicemen. Although the bombing was claimed by a Palestinian group, the Abu Nidal organization, the U.S. government still believed that Gaddafi was behind it, but the group denied Gaddafi's involvement. Yet still, the U.S. retaliated by launching a bomb that targeted Tripoli and Benghazi, hitting several civilian residents and military sites, killing large number of Libyans, including Gaddafi's adopted daughter. This bombing campaign was criticized by international communities. In 1988 also, a bombing occurred on Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, killing 270 people. The bombing was linked to the Libyan government and 2 Libyan intelligence officials were tried and convicted in connection with the attack. Gaddafi's government was accused of providing support to a number of armed groups, including the Irish Republican Army, IRA, the Basque separatist group ETA and the Palestinian group, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, PFLP. Gaddafi and his government denied most of these accusations. In 1999, Gaddafi proposed the creation of the United States of Africa with a central government and a single military. He also proposed various economic initiatives aimed at unifying Africa, such as the creation of a single African central bank, a single African currency, and a Pan-African investment fund. Although this would have been a great feat for the African continent, this vision faced challenges as other African leaders were afraid and reluctant to give up their own control over their country to Gaddafi. Some of the African leaders didn't trust Gaddafi because they believed he was involved in terrorist activities. African leaders were also influenced by the pressure from the international community, particularly from the West, which opposed the idea of a united Africa led by Gaddafi. Gaddafi was the country's top decision-maker, and his management style was very individualized. His leadership style was characterized by a significant emphasis on his own personal power, and he frequently made decisions without consulting others. Gaddafi could not live up to the promise he gave to the Libyans when he overthrew al-Idris. Gaddafi said the mere existence of parliament means the absence of the people, for true democracy exists only through the direct participation of the people and not through the activities of representatives. Gaddafi ruled the country through the Revolutionary Command Council, who made decisions on behalf of the people. This council was created by Gaddafi and his fellow coup leaders, and it was composed by military officials and government officials appointed by Gaddafi. Though the Revolutionary Command Council was supposed to be the intermediary, it never was. The council didn't involve the masses in decision-making and never made a check on the military government. The RCC was only created as a revolutionary institution, intended to guide the country after the overthrow of the monarchy, but it was not designed to be a democratic institution. In 2011, the masses decided to rise against their de facto leader as they were unsatisfied with their living conditions. There was high rate of unemployment and more than half of the population was living in abject poverty. Though Libya had a vast oil wealth, the economy was mismanaged under Gaddafi's autocratic rule. Gaddafi's government was undemocratic. There was no other political party to keep him on his toes. The de facto leader banned private media in the country. Gaddafi's rule was also marked with repression and violence against those who opposed him. These aggravated the civilians to stage a nationwide protest against the government. The protest became more violent when the uprisings against government in Tunisia and Egypt were successful. This gave the Libyans a sense of hope that they too could rise up and overthrow their long-time leader. The Libyan military government deployed security forces to disperse the protesters. The force used live ammunitions and tear gas to disperse the innocent protesters. Gaddafi restricted movements in the country when he announced a nationwide curfew. The government attempted to block social media sites from spreading the news of the protests and the government's violent responses. The military government detained hundreds of people, including protesters, journalists and human rights activists. This violent response from Gaddafi fueled the protests and opposition against the government. As the unrest ceasingly continued, the UN Security Council passed the Resolution 1973, authorizing member states to establish a no-fly-go area over Libya and to use necessary measures to protect civilians. This meant that a military intervention was imminent. A coalition involving United Kingdom, United States of America and the leader, being France, launched airstrikes against Gaddafi's military. This was done under the guidance of NATO, and these airstrikes weakened Gaddafi's military, thereby aiding the opposition forces. The US and NATO provided intelligence and logistical support to the opposition forces in Libya. Muammar Gaddafi died in the civil war, on the 20th of October, 2011. Though circumstances of his death are still subjects of debate, it is accepted that the opposition forces killed him. According to reports, Gaddafi was fleeing to his hometown, Sirte, which was under siege by the National Transition Council. Gaddafi was found hiding in a drainage pipe and got captured by the fighters. He was beaten and then shot to death. After the killing of Gaddafi, Libya has been in a state of violence. The country has failed to establish a strong and effective central government. Barack Obama, the president of USA who intervened during the uprising, admitted that failing to prepare for the aftermath of the ousting of Gaddafi was his greatest mistake he ever made. The rise and fall of Muammar Gaddafi is a story of power, ambition, and the consequences of one man's rule. From his early days as a revolutionary leader to his eventual demise at the hands of his own people, Gaddafi's legacy is a complex and controversial one. His rule brought prosperity to Libya, but also saw the suppression of dissent, widespread human rights abuses, and a legacy of division and instability that continues to this day. The story of Gaddafi serves as a reminder of the fragility of power, and the importance of accountability and the rule of law in any society. If you liked this video, please consider subscribing to my channel for more content like this. If you subscribe to my channel, you'll get notified every time I post a new video. Hit the subscribe button now so you don't miss any of my future videos.